We got the legendary growers in the building, but we're going to bring out the moderator who's put on all these panels. He's been around in the cannabis space for a minute with production. He's the creator of the Vice series, Bonga Petite. I know y'all remember that shit. He's author of the book, How to Smoke Pot Properly. He's a highbrow guide to getting high and the host of the popular podcast, Great Moments in Weed History. David Bienenstock is out here. Let's go. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for holding down the stage both days.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for making this a beautiful event. On behalf of Hall of Flowers, we appreciate you, and it has been our honor to host you, just as it is my honor to introduce two true legendary cultivators of the cannabis plant that brings us all together here today. First, let me bring to the stage Todd McCormick. He is a childhood cancer patient and lifetime cannabis activist. Not yet lifetime. You're going to stay with us a while. Author of How to Grow Medical Marijuana, editor of The Emperor Wears No Clothes with Jack Herer, rhymes with terror. Producer of the documentaries The Union, The Business Behind Getting High, and The Culture High. And he's been cultivating cannabis for over 40 years and is now the proprietor of Authentic Genetics, providing seeds worldwide. Welcome, Todd. And Kevin Jodrey is a self-described career hustler, a cultivator, a nursery operator, a consultant, co-founder of Cookies Research and Development, and co-founder of a very interesting group called the Gangier, and we're going to hear more about that. And I'm going to just get it started. Let's get started at the roots, and I'm going to ask each of you gentlemen, when and where and how did you first encounter the cannabis plant?
My first exposure to herb was in '78. And my buddy's dad was a crooked cop and used to jack people for their weed and their shit. And we went in his room, and on his bureau, we grabbed a bag of weed, and we smoked it. It was between the summer of 6th grade and 7th grade.
I got to say, I've asked that question to a lot of people. That is the most righteous answer of how I got weed for the first time, is I stole it back from a corrupt cop. Thank you. Thank you for your service. And Todd?
Well, back in Rhode Island, where Kevin and I are both from, I was a cancer patient when I was a child. And on the way home from a radiation and chemotherapy session, my mom gave me a joint because she read in Good Housekeeping, February '78 issue, that doctors were giving it to cancer patients. So she went to my pediatrician, and he said, look, you got nothing to lose. So she let me have a joint on the way home. She told me to sip it like it was a straw. And I got high, and by the time I got home, instead of being nauseous and miserable, I wanted sauteed spinach. And she thought, fuck, I got him really high. And that's how I started, really. And then it all went on from there, really. And once I realized that cannabis was this prohibited topic I wasn't allowed to talk about, I always wanted to talk about it. So here we are.
Right on. And for, both of you, we titled this panel, You Can't Understand the Cannabis Space, which is what groovier people try to call the industry, without understanding the cannabis plant. And so for both of you, I'm wondering, what was the first strain or varietal or even maybe experience where you realized that you had a deep connection to this plant?
Cannabis was important to me as a kid. My life was turbulent, so the escape it provided was pretty apparent quickly. But I didn't really understand, I don't think, the potential of cannabis until I got a hold of some really good Thai weed. And it was like a vibration change, where it wasn't so much just numbing, but it was this unbelievable elevation and lifting. And it made me realize just really the potential of what I was holding. And I think that's one of the things that kind of set me on this path that lasted, 45, 46 years.
That's fantastic. For myself, I was smoking my mom's weed when I was 9, 10, and 11, and 12. Started selling her weed when I was 12. But what really changed for me is in January 1984, I was selling a $20 bag of weed to my friend's older brother, who was all of 19 at the time. I thought he was fucking old. I was 13. And he wanted to front the bag, and I was like, no. And he had just purchased a Mel Frank grow book, and I was like, give me the book. And it sounds crazy, but he was a carpenter, and he had built this, like, I'd say a 4 white box that went where your TV would be in your living room, but he had the laundry lines and the fluorescent lights and a timer, and it was like the little picture out of Mel Frank's indoor gardening guide. And I was like seeing fucking color in the Wizard of Oz for the first time when he opened those doors and I saw cannabis plants in front of me actually growing. The world was never the same. And I went home and I cleaned out my closet, and I grabbed my grandmother's fluorescent lights, her timer, her pots, her soil, her watering can, and suddenly I realized why all of her houseplants died, and it was because she never gave it any food. And I had to go and I had to buy plant food at CVS, and I swear it felt like porn. I walked up to the counter with this little Peters 20. I put it on the counter, and I was like, it's for my grandma. Kid's like, whatever, give me the money. And I felt so guilty, like, he's going to know I'm growing weed. And I went home, and it worked. And from that point on, I was a cannabis cultivator. And I haven't had a real job since, like, 1993. I mean, I've known you forever, and fuck, I have never had a real job. I just grow weed. And so it's been this kind of, like, e-ticket through life. I mean, it was, as a 13-year-old, it was like getting given a gold mine in your closet. You know, all my friends loved me. They wanted my next harvest. I could buy the best BMX parts. I got addicted to growing. And I think that growing really taught me more about the development of humanity. It taught me how to cycle with nature. It taught me how to plan ahead. It taught me how to take care of the plants, not too much, but all enough to keep them happy. And it taught me balance. And it was really a beautiful experience. And I think everybody should try growing because it'll ground you. It'll bring you closer to nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Those two answers, too, they touch on something I really wanted to talk about with you both, which is the evolution of the cannabis plant in our lifetime. And, Kevin, your first experience that you talked about was with imported weed, going back to the era before really homegrown in the United States, weed coming in from Thailand, and then Todd, you talked about one of the really early touchstones of cultivation knowledge, Mel Frank's book. And so what do you both remember of that transition? And, you know, how has the knowledge of how to cultivate cannabis evolved along with your journey as cultivators?
That's a good question. What you have to do is you have to kind of look at society and understand that the turbulence of the 60s created this reaching in the 70s. And it went along with equatorial type cannabis where the effects were more lucid, more energetic, more thought-provoking. And when we switched into broadleaf plants for indoor cultivation to escape oppression, we also brought with it that chemotype, that narcotic profile. And it also fit the change from 80 forward, right? So, like, I start cultivating in 80, 83, I get incarcerated. And the militarization, the weaponization of the police on cannabis was just really at a zenith then. And the drug matches the people. So every region, the people steer and push populations to fit their needs. So the location dictates what the plant can be. The people dictate what they want it to do for them. And we've changed in what the needs are and the desires because you could see the pressure around the world. And so, like, hopefully what we have is at some point the ability to get all these different type of profiles pushed forward. The ability for people to be able to get access to all the different types. We've compressed functionally the access in the gene pool. And I think that it's not that those things are bad for people. It's just that it leaves many people unsatisfied.
And can you maybe just, Todd, can you follow up a little bit on, like, what a landrace is and how humans interacted with the plant to make those changes you just described?
Yeah, land races, we would call it like indigenous populations, plants that were there before the people showed up. So if we say Nepal, China, that part of Asia is where cannabis derived from, then a good example is I was in Pakistan, and every village I went to, and I asked them, how long have you been in the village for? They said, my people settled here 2,000 years ago. cannabis was here when we showed up. So landrace means wild. It means that the population's self-sustaining, self-sorting. But as soon as humans touch it, it becomes a steered population because we start to selectively take traits of desirability and we force them forward. And that's what humans do with everything. We take the world around us, we adapt to it, then we adapt the world around us to us. And so it's this ability to be able to look and discover populations that are relatively untouched from what we would call pollution. And pollution doesn't mean that your plants are bad. It just means that the genes that are present were sifted in a protected, limited population. And so what you lose is you lose survivability and you lose diversity in the chemotype. And we end up removing it from the allele, that the genes are no longer present in the plant, so you can't breed and find it. And I think that that's what people have to understand, that cannabis is such a complex bioreactor and it forms so many interesting relationships with the world around it. And people form those relationships with that plant, that the idea of trying our best to maintain the totality of the population is what's kind of critical.
You know, my thought on that is that, you know, it's interesting because in Robert Clark's book, Cannabis, Evolution and Ethnobotany, he makes the point that there really are no landrace varieties. They're all escaped cultivars because all of cannabis originated around Asia, China area, the Hindu Kush Mountains, and then left as industrious cannabis, meaning ropes and sails and paints and varnishes and clothing and paper and even oakum, which was the substance that they would mix hemp fiber with when they would mix it with tar and then put it between the pieces of wood on a ship to cause the ship to be watertight and buoyant, which is what brought cannabis around the equator. And it was all really indigenously used for hemp in all reality. And then in places like Pakistan, Hindu Kush Mountains, Afghanistan, you had what emerged as a hashish culture, and that still takes place. And then initially when we started bringing cannabis in the 50s and the 60s, it was all from places like Vietnam, Thailand, Acapulco Gold, Michoacan, Colombia, and Jamaica. It was all mainly tropical varieties that were being imported in, narrow leaf drug varieties, if you will. And then according to Rob Clark and Skunkman Sam, they didn't start seeing Afghan varieties until the hippies started coming back from the hippie trail in the late 70s. Skunkman Sam got his nickname because he and his wife went to, initially when they met in LA, they fell in love, they went and hitchhiked, they sold all their worldly possessions, as good hippies would, and they flew to London and hitchhiked to Morocco, then from Morocco to Germany, and all the way across Eurasia, through Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Hindu Kush Mountains, ended up living down on the beaches near Goa for almost a year. And when he brought back these varieties from the areas I just mentioned, they all had thiol content, which is the compound that is responsible for skunk smell. It's responsible for the ferments on foods and fruits that are going bad, and humans can detect it in parts per trillion. And in authentic genetics, the number one question I'm always asked is, where's the funk? Where's the skunk? And we still have it. It's still there on some of the older varieties. For instance, Skunk 1 was originally a three-way combination of Afghan, Colombian, and Acapulco Gold. And initially it favored the Afghan, which smelled skunky, and that's where it got the name skunk. But over time, we all of us, because we can detect it as a byproduct of food going bad and we all have an adversity towards it, we bred towards terpenes, which smell like foods and fruits and flowers. And that's why everything in here now is kind of homogenized, because when we started growing indoors, it's as if I could give you a box of Crayola crayons that have 16 crayons, because that's about how long cannabis ranges to finish flowering. Some of the longer varieties, like Original Haze, will come down in 16 weeks. Unfortunately, most of the stuff we find in the modern market, if you will, all finishes within 10 weeks. So if I gave you a box of crayons and you didn't play with numbers 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16, you wouldn't even know what the colors look like. And this is what's happening now. We don't see those terpenes. We don't see those signatures, that spiciness, that incense aroma, that inspirational kind of psychedelic high that Kevin mentioned is kind of lost, because most of what you get in these pre-10-week cultivars is kind of what he also mentioned, which is more of a sedative, relaxing, kind of like the Northern Lights Afghan OG Kush, sit in the hot tub with a remote and not want to do much kind of vibe. And the other energies are still out there. The hazes are still out there, the tropical varieties. It's just that we got to get this industry to move away from just thinking production, and thinking quality, because quality and quantity do not go hand in hand. And now that it's legal, we're not limited by 8 and 10 week plants. We could literally have little 16 rows of meters and be harvesting every single week if we wanted to, of something like he described, tropical, equatorial, elegant, things we don't see. And I had one of my customers who got haze make a joke that you can't go into McDonald's and buy caviar, because the people that go into McDonald's don't even know what the fuck caviar smells or tastes like. They're not looking for it. And that's exactly why you can't go into a lot of these dispensaries or whatever they're calling themselves now and get things like haze, because the people, unfortunately, haven't been exposed to it. They don't even know that other side of the Crayola crayon box. And that's a lot what we're bringing, and that's why we're preserving genetics, and that's a lot of the work that we're doing is so motivated not to lose what we once had.
Absolutely. And I hope everybody's getting the sense already in this panel that we are part of a global community when we hear all of these points of origin from those cannabis strains and land races. And as somebody who hosts a podcast about weed history, I'm going to run through a few of my pet peeves really quickly. One, every once in a while somebody posts that centerfold from High Times from 1978 and goes, look at how terrible this weed is, and it is my dream weed if I had a time machine to go back and smoke those Colombian and land races from around the world. Or you'll read a newspaper article and it starts with, weed started with the hippies in the 1960s. No, humans have been kind of cultivating this plant for about 10,000 years. And then the other one, and you'll hear that all over the grounds, is, oh yeah, I'm an OG in this space. I've been in weed since 2019. So with respect, I think that leads me to ask, in that period when we started to cultivate this plant in the United States, when those genetics came in that could be bred and suited, what were, we already talked about Mel Franks, but what was the state of the information available when you started growing? What were the techniques like then, and how has that evolved in your journey as cultivators to how you do things now?
Well, I started out outdoor, and I remember the first crop we did would have been like 81-ish. I remember us shaking the pollen off the males, seeding the shit out of the plants, because there was no book. There was really very little information. You gotta remember, this is New England too, so it's archaic, rigid against drugs. But when I get into indoor in 89, what I was lucky is I was in the Bay Area, and Berkeley Indoor Grow was the shop that I scored all my gear at. They had a lot of their workers there were going to Cal and getting degrees in botany. And so what I started having access to was really intelligent plant people. And it started really triggering this process of not looking at it as so much of a specialty plant, but to understand plant physiology, period. And then learning how to tailor what we do with plants to fit the bioreactor that's cannabis. So I think that most people of my era, we kind of just screwed up till we succeeded. And all the crazy shit that you do, and everyone kind of talks about the bro science, but when there's nobody to follow, you have to lead. And you're going to make mistakes along the way, and the critical part is to always throw away things that don't have value today. And don't be afraid to admit you made the mistake and you went the wrong route. And what it does is it allows there to be constant development in your skill set. And so I think people from my generation, my age, they get kind of frozen in what was and how it should be. And the reality of it is what it is. And so it's this constant realization that the time's always moving on and technology's always moving on. People's desires and needs are always moving on. And I just try to make sure I stay current in all things technologically speaking, which is the basis of modern cultivation, so that I understand the impact on the plant and I can understand how to choose plants for those impacts.
I like it. you know. For me, I've kind of gone full circle because I started off an indoor grower in soil, you know, mixing together the richest soils I could because I didn't know better. And then in the 90s, I moved towards synthetics and hydroponics and just embraced it because it was complicated and technical, and I thought it was cool because I was a geek. But now I'm back to organics and more simpler farming techniques. I only use really 2 products, 3 products if you include the Hormex I use for cloning, but I use Roots Organic, I use Trifecta, and I use Roots or Hormex number 8, which ironically my grandmother taught me how to clone back in 1984 because she used to make cuttings of her plants. And she taught me how to take a cutting and dip it in the rooting powder and moisten a paper towel, and she'd put it in her little teacup saucer and stick it in the kitchen window. And when that would develop roots, she'd repot it, and that's how I learned how to clone. So she taught me so much, it was insane, and now it's all applied. But when you look at the information that's coming out now about like humic acid, even though it assists with uptaking other nutrients, it's actually muting the cannabinoids across the board. So you're actually, by over-fertilizing your plants, you're actually getting lower potency cannabis. So we're kind of paying extra to ruin our shit. So nowadays, I'm kind of letting my soils extinguish when I'm growing seedless. The way I grow seeded cannabis is different from how I grow seedless cannabis because I'm growing the seed and not the flower, if that makes sense. But when I'm growing just the flowers, now I have a tendency to let the soil peter out. I never believed in leaching. I always joked that, you know, flushing was for toilets, that you have to understand plant physiology to understand that, you know, flushing is bullshit. People that use living soil do not flush all the nutrients out of their soil before they harvest it. It's just not how nature works. And when you think about photosynthesis, the way that a plant makes food, the nutrients are only half of the equation, you know, because all that magic is happening in the leaf. So, you know, evolving over time and just now utilizing the science, I'm learning that less is more, that micronutrients really matter. And, you know, the thiol conversation really boils down to sulfur because, you know, this whole conversation about skunk was something that we, the community, only learned in 2021 because the beer industry, turns out I don't drink beer, but beer drinkers like this skunky pale ale. So the beer industry went into hops to figure out what was causing the skunk in the hops, and they found it was a thiol. So if you go onto Google and you type in manipulating the thiol content in hops, you can read thousands of scholarly articles on the subject because they had so much money to dump into it, and realize it all applies to cannabis because cannabis and hops are very closely related. But this also shows us, if you read all the articles like I did, it really boils down to putting more sulfur in your medium without over-acidifying your medium, and because then that counterproductive, but that will literally, just like using an equalizer on your stereo, you can put fucking John Denver in your stereo, and if you have an equalizer and you crank out 50, 90, 100 hertz, that's going to sound like there's a kick drum behind him. And if you play with growing cannabis and stop messing around with the acidity of your soil, you'll be able to bring out the thiols in almost any cannabis, and you'll find that skunky, funky smell comes back. And the reason I think that it was more common back when Kevin and I was younger in the 80s, early 90s, because we were almost all growing organically. We didn't have a choice. There were no general hydroponics or advanced nutrients. We were like seabird guano, bad shit, you know, it's like whatever we could throw in there we were using, and it was a very rich organic mixture that had often a lot of sulfur in it. And then when we'd harvest, we didn't have time to sit around and let it properly dry because that shit's a felony. So as soon as 4 or 5 days would go by and you could damn near cut it up with scissors and barely get it to work in a glass pipe, we would sell it. And that shit was going out the door because we didn't want to lose moisture weight. And now when you look at the science behind thiols, they develop in the final 10 or so days of maturity. And if you don't let them go to full maturity, you won't even see the plant express them. And then they evaporate away almost as quick. So if you don't catch it in this window of perfect peak maturity and freshness, you'll miss it. So it's really a fascinating study. Like, the more I learn about cannabis, the more I realize that I don't know about cannabis.
Well, it keeps us all here, right? Well, we talked a little bit about the evolution of the plant, and I want to talk about your evolution as cultivators and everyone on this stage started out in the underground era and eventually came above ground, whether that was a decision you made or a decision that was made for you. I'd love to hear that moment of, here we are on a stage. Did you ever think that would be part of your life, and when did you emerge from the underground?
I emerged from the underground in probably 2007 to 2007. I was sitting, I remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting on my couch and I was looking out into my backyard, and I had a fat crop in the wind, and I had a giant clone operation connected to the house, and I had a new girlfriend, the one I'm with right now still, so 15, 16 years later, 18 years later, I'm still with her. So I must have liked her then. And I was as happy as I could have been. I was healthy. There was money. I was traveling. I had this great life. And I asked myself a question I wish I hadn't asked. I said, what's the future going to look like? And I realized that we were going to get nuked right out of existence because we didn't have a resume. I realized that we had nothing to support our work. That no matter how ballin' and bad we were, it meant zero in a regulated world. And I realized that if I didn't enter the legal system, which was medical at that moment, then I wouldn't be able to outrun the problem, because I knew that everybody coming in was going to be better than us in a specific. What we were really good at was we were pretty good at a lot of shit. So I could do a lot. But when you bring in 10 teams and each person's an expert in that team, pretty soon they can outwork you. It's kind of like if you mess around, when you're doing criminal shit, what you find is that the police and the criminal justice system, they go home at night and they go to bed. When you have a case, you don't go to bed. You are always fully aware of what's taking place. And so they basically wear you out. It's like a war of attrition. And I didn't want to get caught in that war of attrition. And I had a 215 since 96. Mick was my friend. I knew the whole crew from the Bay Area, but my level of hustling was way too big for a 215 to protect me. There was no way those plant counts were going to fly. So I just used it to have an ounce in my pocket, like personal use shit. And so I was always a medical user in that regard, but I had zero experience with medical cannabis, and I ended up taking over a facility, and we really, really did some incredible work there, but it also really brought to light to me the plight of people in medical cannabis, and the need for clean medicine, and the need for affordable medicine, and the need for compassion. And so it was crazy, but like me going legal also changed how I saw the world of cannabis in terms of people. But it was really a survival response. I was like, there's no way you're going to, because what am I going to do if I'm not growing dope? This is what I do. This is who I am. Like, this is what I'm going to do till I'm done. So this was a decision I made as a kid, and like I rode that train the whole time. So I really didn't want to have some kind of bullshit stop me from doing what I'm doing. So I had to modify my behavior so that I'd be able to continue. And even though I don't enjoy it as much, I'm really grateful that I'm still able to do what I do.
I like it. It's funny you say that, because I always felt like I was an activist working to put myself out of business. And I have, so to speak, to a large degree. I went from flowers to seeds, so I guess I'm not out of business, but I'm no longer in the flower business because of this, and I think it's great. But that said, for me, it was reading The Emperor Wears No Clothes. I was cultivating cannabis for 10 years before I moved to San Diego, and one day went into a head shop, picked up The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and my life was never going to be the same. And I read it, and I think for a lot of us, we all felt a stigma, like we had made a bad decision, like we were like underlings or something because we were using cannabis, and we just ne'er-do-wells. And when I read his book, it just put me in a different headspace, and I called the number on the back, and I wanted to thank him, maybe bring him out to lunch. I went up there and I met him. We became best friends. I became an editor of his book. And I realized I couldn't be a hypocrite fighting hypocrisy. I had to stand up and do something. I just felt like, incredibly compelled. And I don't know, like being arrested as many times as I was more of just like feeling a need to throw my body on the railroad tracks to try to stop the train, because I felt like the train was so fucking wrong and I was not afraid of it. And, I started the San Diego Compassion Club, where we redistributed, donated cannabis to people that were sick, mainly because I'd run into people that were sick and I couldn't stand to not give them whatever stash I had on me, because I just felt so sad for them. And I couldn't charge the money because, unfortunately, back in the early 90s, an ounce of kind bud was what it costs now, $400. And there's no way you can see somebody who's like, poor and sick and be like, yeah, that's worth more than gold. So I just say, fuck it. And I ended up getting raided and arrested in 95 and 97. I went to prison for 5 years because they basically boiled down to either come in and cooperate or go to prison. And my attitude was, what time do I show up for prison? Because that's the only way this is going to work out. I sat there for 5 years. And when I got out, I went right back to it, growing back again. I started the first nursery in LA called Select Strains, selling things like Romulan, Super Silver Haze, M39, OG Kush you might have heard of. And for me, it was about empowering other growers, and even now I feel like my activism is my seed company, because I joke that 30 years ago I could plant the seed of knowledge in your mind and hope it grows, but now I could put the fucking seeds of cannabis in your hand and hope you go grow them. So it's a huge difference. And now to be able to share what I used for medicine myself and that has helped me, it feels really good. And in a lot of ways, what I'm trying to do is I feel like I work for cannabis. I'm trying to get her seeds, her genetics, her education to as many people as possible, because I feel so indebted that she saved my ass when I was going through cancer. And she's been nice enough to pay my rent, buy me food, and give me pretty nice cars along the way. So thank you, Ganja.
Thank you, Ganja. Thank you, Ganja. And an important point when we talk about legacy in cannabis, it's also a legacy of civil disobedience, and that's how we got here, by people peaceably breaking these laws that we all know are wrong, and many people, Todd included, paid a very serious price for that. And so it's great to celebrate the fun outlaw vibe of the legacy era, but if you are in this industry now operating legally, you need to be very mindful of the fact that that opportunity was also created through a lot of heartbreak and a lot of people separated from their families. And we need to honor that through the way we do business, and we need to honor that through the way we promote this plant to other people. I don't think anybody here doesn't believe that more people need to smoke more, better cannabis, and that's a big part of our job, is to make that available in the best possible way. And so, Kevin, I wanted to have you open, your group. Organization, Ganjier, is looking at connoisseurship around cannabis and a bit of what a sommelier of cannabis would be like. So my question for both of you, as long-time cultivators and also consumers of cannabis, if you're not a grower but you love the plant, what do you look for, and how do you gain an understanding that will help you appreciate the plant and its many benefits?
If I was a consumer and I wanted to, because you have access now you have the most access you've ever had. You just have access to very limited choices. So instead of having the whole box of crayons, you have half the box, but you have an unlimited amount of half the box. You could break every crayon twice and still have more crayons. So what I think with people that are consumers, what they have to do is they have to be able to start to get an idea of what's available in purchase. And then I always tell them, journal it. It's the same with medical patients. When we work with people that were really trying to understand how to use medical cannabis, what I really discovered was it was about budget. It was money was what stopped them from usage. And so it was weird, because for us as dope growers, we unlimited weed. So you could smoke all you wanted plus more. But for most people, that's not the case. And for medical people, it's without question the biggest issue, because they are already wore out from whatever problem they're facing, and it just makes it tougher. And so what they want to be able to do is start to journal and find products. And there's reviews. There's Buddhist. Ganjier helps you understand education. Buddhist is a platform that shows reviews. It shows and well written reviews. so that people can take a look and say, hey, how did this product affect this person? And does that mean it's going to affect you the same? No. But if we can see multiple reviews and we see similarities, we can start to make projections, and it starts to be able to mitigate risk in terms of spending money. And what you're trying to find is value buys. You're trying to find things that are at the level you need at the price you can afford. Because fundamentally, to me, there's two customers in the world, and there's a million reasons why you buy something, but there's two customers. The one that buys what they want and the one that buys what they can afford. The one that buys what they want is very rare. That's what cannabis right now is trying to cater to, those that buy what they want. That population doesn't shop at the dispensary. The dispensary is primarily people who buy what they can afford, and they stop at storefronts or whatever we want to call a place of purchase on the way home from work so they can change the direction of their life. Most consumers today are either buying from a store, they're going to a neighbor and buying, but the idea is, how do you find something that works for you in terms of titration, which is effective dosage, and how do you make it as cost effective as possible so that you're not having to spend every drop of your disposable income on your weed? And I think that that's the conundrum for most, is that they just don't get enough access. They don't have enough information to make choices. And so it's financially risky, which is why they stick with the same thing over and over, because they just can't afford to make a mistake and have a product that doesn't work.
I like it, Kevin. You know, in my perspective of seeing this, the problem we have with, especially if you're a real medical patient, is consistency and uniformity in products. Because even if you go back and you get the same product from the same vendor over and over again, one can be a little older, could have been sitting a little longer, it's a little drier, and it's just not there. And I tell everybody, if you really want to have a good relationship and get to know cannabis, you're going to have to learn how to cultivate cannabis. It's a wonderful hobby, it's very enriching, and you really get to experience it, because I also teach people that there's about a 3-week window of opportunity to harvest your plant, depending on where you like it. You can harvest early, where you'll get a more of a lighter, psychedelic, kind of like trippy, almost equatorial type high, or you can let the plant go 3 weeks longer, and you'll get a more sedative, relaxed kind of high. And it's because of the buildup of cannabinoids and terpenes in those 3 weeks. So there's no wrong. You know, the old rule of thumb used to be when half of the little hairs went from white to red, it was at peak, and to cut it down. It turned out to be bullshit. It's not how we see it now that we're doing, you know, cannabinoid testing and terpene testing, and we see it ramp up. And there is a point where the plant falls off and it can't do it anymore, where it just gets sick of growing. But you got to let it go. So I tell people, hey, cultivate your plants. When you're harvesting, leave 3 or 4 plants in. Let one of them go 2 weeks longer. Let one of them go 3 weeks longer. See how they feel. See how they look. See how you like them at the end of it, because you might change your whole perspective. When I started selling OG Kush cuttings to some friends of mine, I remember a friend of mine brought me a little bag of like red-haired bud, and I was like, what is this? And he's like, it's OG Kush. I said, it's not OG Kush. He goes, I got the clones from you. I said, what'd you do to it? So I harvested it week 8. I said, try harvesting it at week 10 and come back to me. And he brought me back little green golf ball buds full of resin, no hairs. I said, ah. And he goes, yeah, it made a difference. And people don't realize that, because unfortunately, a lot of this market is impatient, and this is why you see immature cannabis. And the other problem we're seeing with it is that there's really poor post-harvest handling. So even as good as you can grow cannabis, if you're not handling it correctly once you cut it down, and when I say handling it correctly, understanding the relative humidity that's in the room that you're opening the bag in, because if you open up a bag of cannabis in a room that's 30% humidity over and over and over again, the fucking bag's going to dry out and the weed's going to be horrible. And this is part of the problem, because it's so easy to ruin. I mean, you can get something in an expert grew like Kevin, outdoors in sunshine, pure love, and then somebody gets it, leaves the bag open overnight, it dries out, and they're like, oh, what the hell's this? It wasn't his fault. It was the guy who left the bag open all overnight. And this is what too many people just don't understand and need to be educated. And that's what Gangier is trying to do. That's what Jack and I have been trying to do for 30 years. That's what this whole real... Like, even, you know, David, I've known you for a quarter of a century. This whole thing has been about education for those of us that have been around for a long time, because there's a great quote. I love this quote. I've written it in so many of Jack's books, I can't remember how many. But it says, the greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. And it's It's really what gets in the way of everybody, because we think we know better, but we don't. And there's a lot of room for us to grow. There's a lot of information about terpenes, moisture levels, how to dry, how to handle it, how to keep good pot good for as long as possible. And these are the things that I think everyone, even the people that go out and buy a bag of weed or invest $50 into an eighth, they should know how to, when they come home, how to handle it so it doesn't go bad literally almost overnight.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point. I've been interviewing. Wow, quarter century. I've been interviewing growers a long time, and I've only, we walk around, you only meet two kinds of growers. I just got started, and I have a million questions, or I am the best grower who ever lived, and the really true excellent growers are the ones who are humble to the plant and understanding that we are co-evolving with this plant as we grow it, as is our knowledge. And on the consumer side, the smoker side, we all get to be our own ganjier. And that's one of the beautiful parts of this. And, I would love to hear a little bit more of like what that training is like, but also I just want to note, like so much, Todd pointed out some old school wisdom that turned out to not be correct. And we now live in an era where we can verify this and we can adjust. But a lot of it turns out to be absolutely correct. And something I've always believed is the nose knows. Like your nose is an incredibly sophisticated instrument to decide what you should put in your body, because back in the day you ate the wrong thing and you died. And so it can also tell you what cannabis you're going to like in ways that you may not understand. And then when you combine that with the kind of knowledge that we have now, you can really dial in exactly what you're looking for. So how do you, what are the courses of study, and how, what do people have to do to get through that program, Kevin?
The Ganjier was created because one of the real problems you see with anything is communication. You have to develop standardized language, and then you have to have processes that people can understand, utilize, and then transmit that information to someone else. So until you have an ability to get a common language and a transmittal, it's isolated. And there's some parables. You can look at Babel. The idea of Babel was they were going to build a tower to the heavens, except it was an insult to God. So God says, you're all going to speak a different language, and the tower collapses. If you can take that, however many thousands of years old that story is, it helps you understand the reason why you need to have clear, agreed upon information. And someone said, well, how can you do this with cannabis? And I'm like, if you can teach people to grade diamonds, you can teach people to grade cannabis. And so the idea is to be able to develop these tools about how do you look at things. And we all realize that none of us independently were really qualified to look at such an incredible topic. And so 21 of us got together and spent 7,000 hours fighting over who was smartest, who was not, who was best, who was not. And we all realized that none of us knew what we were talking about in totality at all, and that we all really only understood some very specific lanes deeply. So even though we were generalists in many things, we were specialists in few things. And so the totality of the council allowed there to be this. It was fascinating to me. It was the first time I ever got to be involved in a project like this, where we all really understood what we wanted was to create a lexicon, a conversation, a language that was transferable to people so that they would be able to make better choices. And then, so there's this very intensive education on how do you grade and how do you look at. But what the team realized as well was that there has to be an education around the world of cannabis, so that when people are looking at the product, they really understand that the product you're looking at has been very muted because illegalities created. I mean, when I was a kid, right, a good example is my cousin's in prison for 200 years, and I'm getting a lecture on how I'm the worst relative in the family because I got caught with a bag of weed. And I'm laughing because I got relatives doing double life sentences, and they're less criminal than I am as a 13-year-old with a bag of grass. That's how demonized weed was. And so because of that, there's no information that's agreed upon. People can't really understand how we got to where we are and what's the story of it. And you don't understand the impacts of that. And so the Ganjier created this really comprehensive education on all the facets of cannabis, including the story of illegality, the civil rights, and how it pertains to this. And what it does, it gives people a more developed information. It's kind of like when I looked at the book Todd brought up, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. I was fully aware of what hemp was prior, but when I looked at that, it just brought all these things into light, and it just created this really fascinating synthesis of understanding that let me now apply skills in a more determinate manner. And I think that that's what was needed in an industry, was that you have so many people that are all knowledgeable smokers, but do they actually know how to function in today's world, asking someone else what to buy? Do they know how to convey to someone else what they might need in a way that actually works? And we've been really successful with it in that regard. And how do you determine success? We can look at like financial metrics, but the success to me is the success of the student in terms of how they formed beautiful relationships that allow them to support each other, that allow them to work and build and develop a healthy industry that lets people who are coming in get the education they need to make smart decisions, and let the people who are in place provide that information and be able to be seen as intelligent in a field where, for all of us that were, I always call myself a dope grower because I was called a dope grower so much because it was such a derogatory term that I embraced that shit, and I still wear that as a shirt, And so it's this ability to take things from the past and bring them forward, but also to take the knowledge and the science that we're developing currently and weave it in. And so the Ganjier, I call it like a living statement, because as new information comes in, we'll be able to refine. But the idea of getting 21 people to work for 7,000 hours to come up with a program that allows people to have consistent decisions, consistent grading, consistent standards that are easy to convey and translate was powerful.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing that work.
Thank you.
And Todd, did you want to?
I
I just had a question for you.
Go right ahead.
We talked in this panel. You had probably the two most intense experiences a person can have with cannabis. You spoke as a childhood cancer patient and the life-saving and life-changing effect of this medicine, and then not going to put this on cannabis, but society put you in prison for this plant. You've been through all the ups and downs that any one of us in this culture, in this industry, have experienced, and you are still a force moving forward. And I just thought perhaps you can talk about how you stay inspired and how you continue to envision a bright future for cannabis.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you saying that. It's been a struggle. It's been like a roller coaster. It's had some incredible highs and some incredible lows. And as a child, it's hard to fathom for most people, but I actually had cancer 10 times. I had it 9 times between ages 2 and 10. I had it 9 times between 1972 and 1979, 1980. And it's a lot of times. And I had to learn how to develop an optimism and a resilience because if I didn't, I think I would have caved into the depression a long time ago. And it may sound not so odd to this crowd, but when I was 13, I was selling bags of weed to my older friends. I jumped in one of the cars and we went down to Providence because Grateful Dead was in town. And I never made it into the concert, but I scored my first sheet of acid. And I know this isn't an event about psychedelics, but, between ages 13 and current. I, to be honest, I got into LSD and psilocybin, and I didn't know at the time in my teens, but you know, my many trips with mushrooms, I can't count how many ounces of mushrooms I've sold, and I mean, even hash and acid. I used to keep the sheets and hold them up to the light and keep the dark ones for myself. Like, I can't count how many times I've done acid. When I met Dr. John Lilly, who the movie Altered States was based on, we became friends, and he gave me his personal deprivation tank, and I still have it to this day, and it's fucking awesome to float in John Lilly's tank. He gave me his shower shoes too, and I don't know how long it'll take me to walk from the dep tank to the shower to do a mile in his shoes, but I'm working on it. And you know, psychedelics, I think, made a really big difference because I didn't realize until now, when we're seeing all this information about cannabinoids and psilocybin and LSD being profound. You know, they're talking about one trip on mushrooms being able to cure lifetime depression. And I can only think that as a child who had cancer as many times as I had, that you know, if it wasn't for cannabis and it wasn't for these other substances that I bumped into, which opened my mind, opened my heart, gave me courage, got me out of Rhode Island, you know, made me go explore the world, I don't know if I would have the motivation that I had to show up on time to go to prison. I mean, they were so mean to me that after 18 months of sitting in prison, they sent my attorney in, and he says, look, I already know your answer, but I'm obligated to offer you whatever they offer you. So time served if you'll come down and cooperate. And I said, fuck no. He goes, you really ready to sit here for another 3.5 years? I said, listen, I got to live with myself for the rest of my life. What else am I going to do? And he was like, I respect that. And I sat in prison for another 3.5 years. But when I got out of prison, there was a wonderful getting out of prisons party. There was Jack Herra there, all my friends on Melrose, and it was like going right back to my life. And I know it sounds crazy, but and this may sound like I'm batshit crazy to say, but 5 years in prison was worth a lifetime of freedom because I didn't have to compromise myself along the way. And I wish we would all be willing to go to prison because if we would have broken the system a long time ago because the system could not process all of us. And it is beautiful for me to come here now and to see thousands of people, and you're doing such a wonderful job with orchestrating this, and Hall of Flowers bringing this together, because this doesn't just represent the culture that I love so much. You're the megaphone to the culture because you are the buyers, you're the distributors, you're the people taking chances in this business right now. You're the people trying to amplify the healing powers of cannabinoids to the rest of the world. And I thank you for that. I mean, with my whole heart. As a little kid who had cancer and was afraid to say the word marijuana to anybody. I mean, literally, I had a mom who held up a bag of her zigzags and said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's your rolling papers." And she said, "No, you don't know what it is and you've never seen it before." And then she held up a bong and she goes, "What's this?" I said, "It's a bong." "No, you don't know what it is and you've never seen it before. If you tell them what you know, they'll take you away from me and put me in jail." And I was like, what the fuck is wrong with society? And this is all what we're facing now still. And you guys are doing a great job of bringing this and mainstreaming this, and thank you all for coming out today. But the fight is not over. The struggle is not even close to finished. And we all really have to really dig down deep, get a bedding understanding. It's not just about learning your terpenes and your cannabinoids. It's really learning your history, your hemp. The reasoning why we are getting our laws changed is because we're all right. All of you. Everyone that woke up today and smoked a joint and said, fuck it, I'm not going to be an alcoholic. Fuck it, I'm not going to take some pharmaceuticals that you're forcing me. And just made the choice to cannabis. You're all heroes. You may not know it, but in my opinion, you are, because you're standing outside of society and saying, no, I'm not wrong, you're all wrong. So thank you.
Absolutely. And we have just a few minutes left. We want to give you all a chance to get rolled up and ready for 420 and enjoy the last hour of Hall of Flowers. I'm going to say thanks again to all of you for coming out. And Kevin, maybe you can leave us with your vision of a hopeful future of cannabis. What would you like to see the future for this plant and this culture and this industry look like?
Ooh, if you know, take the brakes off and just have wishful thinking.
Yeah.
I like wishful thinking. If I could have wishful thinking, I would have global cannabis. I would have cannabis growing in all the places that it's going to grow and allow all the places to shine in their own individual light. And so what I want to see is I want to see all these different cultures connect through cannabis. I want cannabis to do what it. I traveled the Silk Road. I walked the Silk Road, the Alexander the Great cross through the Karakura Mountains, so I could recreate the trip Herb made through Asia. And walking on that ground and realizing how cannabis in its own way united so many people and created so many phenomenal relationships. That's my dream, that the world gets to grow unfettered, that as many people as possible are free to behave in the way they choose with the plant, and that freedom allows there to be the most expression and the most creativity and just the best possible outcome.
All right, everybody, you got your marching orders. We have a shared vision for the future. I want to, first of all, one more time, thank you all for coming out and making Hall of Flowers Ventura a beautiful and lit experience for 2 days. And one more time, please give it up for Todd and Kevin and all of our speakers here on the stage today. You got about 20 minutes to 4:20. I think you know what to do. Enjoy the rest of your day. Get home safe. And again, thank you from everyone at Hall Flowers. And we'll see you next time. We'll be in Santa Rosa in September and New York City in October. So keep it lit, everybody.